Aloha, everybody.
Aloha, Pastor Mark.
Daniel chapter 2 is your request. That's exactly what God had for you today. So good request. Daniel chapter 2, considered one of the most important chapters of the entire Bible. You will see why. It is long, but it is thorough. We opened our series last week in the opening chapter, and we have set it all up where Daniel and many others, including who we now know as Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, have been taken off to Babylon. They've been put into the king's service. They are the cream of the crop. They're going to his postgraduate school, so they learn all the things of Babylon. And as chapter 2 opens, something fascinating happens. One of the reasons this is the most important chapter in the Bible, as some believe, is that it will be revisited. The theme of this will be revisited later in the book of Daniel. So you're going to see Daniel deal with the dream and interpretation of the dream from King Nebuchadnezzar. But as this chapter closes, there is more to come in our study that impacts us, as we said, to this day. So let's take a look together as Daniel 2 opens. Now it says, now in the second year of Nebuchadnezzar's reign, to give us our timing, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. I think it's important to get the plural part of that. He was having a series of dreams, and we'll see the result of that. It says his spirit was so troubled from these dreams that sleep left him. Maybe you've had that happen to you, something so disturbing in a dream that you can't sleep. And so this is the king, and if the king can't sleep, nobody else sleeps. So it says the king gave the command to call the magicians, the astrologers, the sorcerers, and the Chaldeans, which is that special group that Daniel was being trained up and with, the Chaldeans, to tell the king his dreams. He wanted all of his powerful men that are supposed to be so close to the small g gods to tell the dream and capture that too. Not the interpretation is his request, but the dreams. Plural here, he's going to get some more specific to one dream, and that's going to be key. Daniel is going to address both, but he wants to know the dream. So they came and they stood before the king, and Daniel is not a part of this first group, but his past advisors. They come and they said, the king said to them, I have had a dream. Now it's this particular dream, and my spirit is anxious to know the dream. I've had a dream. I want to know the dream. And then the Chaldeans spoke to the king in Aramaic. By the way, this is the only place in the Old Testament that's written in Hebrew where this portion is Aramaic now. There's nowhere else in the Old Testament that happens, just as a side note. But they speak to him, and they're responding to him, and they say to him, O king, live forever. Tell your servants the dream. What was his request? You tell me the dream. Again, not the interpretation yet. He wants both. But they are saying, well, you tell us the dream, and we can call 1-900 psychic, and we'll just make up an interpretation. And you're not going to know the difference. You're the king. We're the professionals. So just tell us the dream, and we'll tell you what it means. But notice again, he says, or they're saying, tell your servants the dream, and we will give you the interpretation. The king answers and replies to them and said to the Chaldeans, my decision is firm. I've already told you guys. My decision is firm. If you do not, this will show you how serious the king is. If you do not make known the dream to me and its interpretation, I want both, you shall be cut in pieces, and your houses shall be made into ash heaps. I'd say he's serious. I'd say he's bothered by his dream. And now these guys who have probably gotten away with a lot, they certainly had demonic powers and they could do certain things, but they probably a lot of sleight of hand stuff, going on back in the day. And they would just appease the king a lot. But he's going, no, I said I want the dream. I want you to tell me what I was dreaming, and I want you to tell me the interpretation. And if you don't, here's door number 2. I'm going to cut you in pieces, and your houses are going to be turned to ash heaps. What do you think their response was? I mean, their power is limited, even though they might have thought more highly of themselves. They're going, oh my goodness, I just took out a 2.99 loan on my house. I got 30 years left to pay on it. But wait a minute, if I'm cut into pieces, it doesn't really matter about the house. I mean, everything is on the table for these guys. And the king is serious. By the way, one of just to remind you of how horrible Nebuchadnezzar was, God is using him. God will use him, and God will use him in spite of his wickedness. But he wouldn't just kill people, as you can tell here, he would torture them. And there's a sighting of a king from Judah, or a story of a king from Judah that he was going to kill. And before he killed them, he brought his sons before him, killed all of them while the king watched, and then gouged his eyes out. So the last thing this king would see would be the death of his sons. Nebuchadnezzar was no one you would want to mess with. So what you're hearing, although we might think a little lighter of it our day, is he was literally going to cut these people to pieces, kill them, and wipe out all their houses. So that's the response he gives when they say, you tell us and we'll tell you the interpretation. He says it's not going to happen that way. However, if you tell the dream and its interpretation, you shall receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So therefore, tell me the dream and its interpretation. There's no negotiating here. I want the dream, tell me what I was dreaming, and I want the interpretation. So the king answered, or they answered again and said, let the king tell his servants the dream. Now they're pleading, literally for their lives, right? You can't do it, you're dead. So once again, they try, let the king tell the servants the dream, and we will give its interpretation. Well, that was the end of the line here, because it tells us in verse 8, then the king answered and said, I know for certain that you would gain time, that you wanted to stall, because you see that my decision is firm. If you do not make known the dream to me, there is only one decree for you. For you have agreed to speak lying and corrupt words before me all the time. That's changed. Therefore, tell me the dream, and I shall know that you can give me the interpretation. You guys are supposed to be so close to your gods and know what they're supposed to say. He kind of brings up some past stuff, so it tells you not only is he firm and he's going to do this, but he doesn't trust them. And so you either put up or you get put 6 feet under. And the Chaldeans answered the king again and said, there is not a man on earth who can tell the king's matter. Therefore, no king, lord, or ruler has ever asked such a thing of any magician, astrologer, or Chaldean, this group. And this is a difficult thing. You're asking way too much from us and of us. And this is a difficult thing, king, to ask for your dream, all that the king requests. And there is no other who can tell it to the king except the gods, small g, except the gods whose dwelling is not with flesh. There's quite a statement. They are setting up Daniel, aren't they? They don't even realize it. This is impossible. That's stuff for the gods. No other king has ever done this. But don't forget, they're pleading for their lives. If they don't give the dream and the interpretation, they're dead. So for this reason, the king was angry and very furious. You thought he was mad before? He doesn't like their excuses. He doesn't like their response. And he gave the command to destroy all the wise men of Babylon. So no more negotiation, no more talk. Every one of his astrologers and magicians and leaders are going to be put to death. And he actually starts doing it. Now, remember, Daniel's in this group. He's not in the group presenting to the king right now, but he's in the bigger group of these Chaldeans. And so is Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So king's mad. He says, that's it. Destroy the wise men of Babylon. So the decree went out, the king's decree, and it started happening. They began killing the wise men, and they sought Daniel and his companions to kill them because they were part of the Chaldeans. King says, off with their heads. They're all dead. And so there it is, set up. Daniel and his 3 friends are included in this decree to be killed. Daniel hasn't done anything, neither are the other 3, but they're part of the group, and they're already starting the slaughtering. So verse 14, then with counsel and wisdom, Daniel answered Arioch, and Arioch is directly under the king. He's basically in charge of the execution. And so they come knocking on Daniel's door and say, time to get up and time to be killed, basically, and bring your 3 friends with you. And Daniel responds, and he answers to Arioch, the captain of the king's guard, who had gone out to kill the wise men of Babylon. And he answered and said to him, to Arioch, the king's captain, why is the decree from the king so urgent? What's happened? What's the urgency of all of this? And Arioch made the decision known to Daniel. He told him what went down. So Daniel, and look at the gap here. We don't have a lot of fill-in, but it tells you that Daniel probably already has favor with the king because he goes to meet with the king. Daniel hears that everyone's going to be put to death, and he went and asked the king to give him time. The others were stalling, but Daniel has now audience with the king, and he is set apart by God for a purpose. Very important to remember right now. And so Daniel gets an audience with the king, and he goes to ask the king if he could have some time, that he might tell the king the interpretation. I'll tell you actually the dream and the interpretation, but give me a little time. And as he does that, it says Daniel, he's granted that. Daniel went to his house. He made the decision known to Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, as their Babylonian names are known. And they were his companions. He made the decision known. Do you know why? So they could have a prayer meeting. And it is one of the most significant prayer meetings of all time. He makes the decision known that they might seek mercies from God of heaven concerning this secret, so that Daniel and his companions might not perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. I want you to notice that they were praying for their lives as well. And Daniel doesn't do it alone. He asks for his brothers to pray, his companions to pray for him and them, for the mercies of God, that they would not be put to death. Focus on that as you watch how it transitions now. Daniel's companions pray so they won't perish with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. And remember, some are already being killed. Then the secret was revealed to Daniel in a night vision. The secret meaning the dream and the interpretation. First, they pray. The revelation, or as it's called the night vision here, is made to Daniel. And Daniel blesses the God of heaven. And you're going to read that blessing here in the following verses with verse 29 and following, 20 and following. Praise. God saves their lives as the story goes on. And he reveals to them, to the king, that which the astrologers and all the others said, there's nobody that could do that. There's nobody that would know that. That belongs to the gods alone. And now Daniel, bold, remember, a very young man, he was a teenager when he got there, goes before King Nebuchadnezzar, and watch how it unfolds. Daniel answered and said, this is his praise to God first, "Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his." Daniel's under this now freedom of not only having his life spared and his friend's life spared, but now possessing the revelation that didn't come from Daniel. It came from God to Daniel. And he has nothing but praise for God. He's extremely humbled that his life is saved, and he's extremely humbled that God would use him to deliver one of the most powerful messages in the Bible. So blessed be the name of God forever and ever, for wisdom and might are his, and he changes the times and the seasons. Now watch carefully here, because this is a statement about God in general, not just the specifics of what happened to Daniel. Here's what Daniel knows. This is why he's blessing God. He changes the times and the seasons. Would it be fair to say that right now, not just in America, but in our world, we're in some difficult times and seasons? Israel's in some difficult times and seasons. Afghanistan is some difficult times. This God that we serve, he changes the times and the seasons. I know nobody in this room is stressed over leadership of our country, or political decisions, or what's going to happen next with other leaders. I know we don't do that, right? Check this next verse out. He removes kings and he raises up kings. The people that I think are so powerful, God can go, next. And he raises up new kings, leaders, presidents, kings, queens. The God that we serve changes times and seasons. He removes kings and raises kings. He gives wisdom to the wise. That wise person who seeks God will have added wisdom to their wisdom. And knowledge to those who have understanding. This God reveals deep and secret things. Daniel's a witness. He just revealed the king's dream to me and the interpretation. This God reveals deep and secret things. He knows what it is in the darkness, and light dwells in him. And now he personalizes it. I thank you and I praise you, God. I lift your name up. I thank you and I praise you, O God of my fathers. You have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we ask of you. You answered our prayers, Daniel says, to save our lives and to give us this secret revelation. For you have made known to us the king's demand. So take a big breath. That's Daniel's praise. And what a good reminder to thank God after you pray. Thank God for answered prayers. Even if you don't see the answers, God's at work. Thank him for the God he is. Daniel does all of that. And verse 24 is Daniel explaining the dream. Now, it's deep, it's heavy. Remember, we're not going to be explaining all of chapter 2 or all of the dream and the interpretation, although you'll get a good understanding. But it's a foundation for what will come later. So it's going to go through prophecy, and it's going to be revealed to the pagan king, but it has impact for even where we sit today. Here we go, verse 24. Therefore Daniel went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to destroy the wise men of Babylon. And he went and said to him, do not destroy the wise men of Babylon. Daniel's prayers also saved many lives. Don't kill them. Take me before the king, and I will tell the king the interpretation. Arioch says quickly, he brings Daniel before the king and said thus to him, I have found a man of the captives of Judah who will make known to the king the interpretation. And the king answered and said to Daniel, whose name was Belteshazzar, it's his Babylonian name, are you able to make known to me the dream which I have seen and its interpretation? I want both, young man. And Daniel answered in the presence of the king, and he said, here you go. And he unloads it. The secret which the king has demanded. Listen to the clarity that Daniel brings to this. King's up all night, he's tortured, he's tormented, and Daniel brings the clarity. The secret which the king has demanded. The wise men, the astrologers, and the magicians, and the soothsayers cannot declare to the king. You tried it with them, right, king? They couldn't do it. So let's clarify that. Verse 28, but there is a God. Would you underline that? The little g guys and their club couldn't do it, but There is a God, King. And that's a capital G. But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the latter days. Daniel takes no credit. He gives all the credit to God. And he goes, yeah, I'm going to be your translator, so to speak. I'm going to be the communicator. But there is a real God. He's in heaven, and he wants you, King, to know what's going to happen in these final days. He wants to reveal secrets to you, what will be in the latter days. Your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. As for you, O king, and what Daniel's going to describe now is this image that is actually well agreed upon by different Bible commentators and theologians. There's not much countering what this image stands for, just as it comes out of Daniel. Remember, we talked about how some people criticize the book. Everyone's in clear agreement on this statue or this image that Daniel's going to describe. He says, your dream and the visions of your head upon your bed were these. As for you, O king, thoughts came into your mind while on your bed about what would come to pass after this, and he who reveals secrets has made known to you what will be. This is the latter times. This is your dream. I'm going to talk about your visions and the interpretation of it all and what was coming through your mind. As for me, this secret has not been revealed to me because I have more wisdom than anyone living, but for our sakes who make known the interpretation to the king, and that you may know the thoughts of your heart. So it's not about Daniel. God's chosen to reveal this to you, king, in your position, in your place. And remember, this is a very pagan, as we use the term pagan king. But God will use unbelievers, pagans. He'll use whoever he wants to use. Nebuchadnezzar's the ruler of the world, as it was known then. The sole ruler, the king. He was not a part of a federation or a group or a committee. He was the king in charge. And so God chooses to speak to him. Verse 31, you, O king, were watching, and behold, a great image. You saw a great image. The great image, whose splendor was excellent, stood before you, and its form was awesome. The image's head, and what Daniel's going to do now is take the head, the chest, the tummy, the legs, the feet, and describe the different the four major, and leading to the fifth, the four major kingdoms of the earth, starting with Nebuchadnezzar. And so he says the image head was fine gold, and its chest and arms were silver, its belly and thighs were bronze, and its legs of iron, they were of iron, and its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. I'm going to continue to read on, and we'll come back and break that down in just a few moments. You watched while a stone was cut without hands, an uncut stone by hands, which struck the image on its feet of iron and clay, and broke them in pieces. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, the gold were crushed together and became like chaff from the summer threshing floors, just blowing in the wind. And the wind carried them away so that there was no trace of them was found. And the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. How you doing so far with Bible prophecy? This is one of the most fascinating but most complete pictures of what happens way back in Daniel's day. And 40 years later, he'll come back to this same image. Daniel will have a dream. So God, keep in mind, God is speaking to a non-believing king about the future of the world, and he starts with him. The head represented Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar, and gold, the most valuable. And so he starts there and just unpacks this thing before him. So you have this image that was in his dream, the head being gold representing Nebuchadnezzar, The chest and arms of silver would be the next kingdom after the Babylonian Empire. That would be the Medes and the Persians. So that was represented with silver. Notice how each of the value drops. You start gold and the most precious metals, and then silver is a little under gold. So the Medes and the Persians come into rule. They're represented as silver. They're very powerful, but they're not one king. They're a king serving with a bunch of nobles. So the solo king Nebuchadnezzar, he's the gold head. Then you go down to the Medes and the Persian when that era comes, and it's represented with silver. You get down to the Grecian Alexander and all of that rule, and it drops to bronze, even though they were now multiple leaders. And then finally the leg of iron is Rome. And at the very bottom, the feet and toes are a mixture of clay and iron, and as a result, they're very divided, kind of with the idea of the toes. And a rock comes down eventually, like a meteorite, hits the divided weakest part, and crumbles the whole statue. That's basically what King Nebuchadnezzar was dreaming. And as he was dreaming that, Daniel interprets and says, those are all the main leaderships of our world, all the way to the latter times. And something's going to destroy it all. Now, it's only fair to say that as we look at this passage, there are some people that believe that rock, and I'll just present their belief, they're Christians that are professing Christians that would say that rock that comes down and destroys all this is the church. And Jesus came and he equipped the church, and the power of the gospel went out and finally collapsed all the world governments. No. This rock is Jesus. Yes, he's the one, as the old hymn says. This rock is Jesus, the only one. And the perfect timing, when the Antichrist, who represents the feet and the toes, when the Antichrist is controlling, everyone's worshiping the Antichrist, and it seems like, hey, all the mandates are going and everything's clicking and things are getting, all of a sudden a rock comes from the heaven. It's Jesus Christ. He destroys that world system and eventually sets up the right kingdom, which we call the millennial kingdom, the 1,000 reign of Christ. Now, I backed the truck up. Could you hear it? Beep, 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 beep. I've dumped a lot here. All we want to do is just get a kind of a frame of it. Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian Empire, the head of gold. The next one, chest and arms of silver, the Medo-Persians. The belly of bronze, the Grecian. Legs of iron, Rome. Feet and toes, mixture of clay and iron, which, by the way, we should mention it's pretty clear that that'll be a revision of the Roman Empire of some part. Antichrist steps in with this 10 Federation. Some people think that's already happened, but again, it's pretty clear here that something completely by God's direction will knock it out. By the way, the church isn't equipped to run the world. Can we just say that? Yeah. The church has a job. We're to preach the gospel. We're to love people. We're to share how there's a plan of salvation. You vote, do what you do, but the church is not to be this big, powerful thing that runs. That's happened in history, right? It's called the Dark Ages. Didn't go real well. So that's why we hold to this position, and Christ is there. Okay, so there it is. Watch how the chapter ends. He says, as he has 30 more verses to cover. 36. This is the dream. The image, is presented. By the way, that rock becomes a great mountain. There's another picture of Christ. So verse 36, this is the dream. Now we will tell you the interpretation of it before the king. You almost get the feel that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were with him, right? We will tell you. Maybe God and Daniel. Verse 37, you, king, are a king of kings. For God, the God of heaven, has given you a kingdom. God establishes kings. He removes kings. This is an evil king, but God gave him the position. Power, strength, glory. And wherever the children of men dwell, or the beasts of the fields, or the birds of the air, he has given them into your hands and has made you ruler over them all. You are this head of gold. There's your interpretation. Hey, Ned, that's you. God's talking about you in your dream, in the interpretation. That's you. But after you, verse 39, shall arise another kingdom inferior to yours, a little lower, right? Drop down to the chest, the Medo-Persians. And it will be inferior to yours. Then another, a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth, has more coverage. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, inasmuch as iron breaks in pieces and shatters everything. And like iron that crushes, that kingdom will break into pieces and crush others. Now you're down to where we at, the Roman Empire. Whereas you saw the feet and toes partly of potter's clay, partly of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. There it is. Yet the strength of the iron shall be in it. So you have strong leadership and weak leadership. I got to do that in my mind. Strong leadership and weak leadership. Strong presidents and weak presidents. Strong kings and weak kings. You'll have that in the last days. Just as you saw the iron mixed with ceramic clay, and as the toes of the feet were partly of iron and partly of clay, so the kingdom shall partly be strong, partly be fragile. As you saw iron mixed with ceramic clay, they will mingle with the seed of men, but they will not adhere to one another, just as iron does not mix with clay. And this is talking about the whole 10 federations that will eventually be in place. And in the days of these kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. It will never be destroyed. And the kingdom shall not be left to other people. It shall break into pieces, consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. Inasmuch, verse 45, inasmuch as you saw that stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, the gold, the great God has made known to the king what will come to pass after this. Then Daniel says these words, the dream is certain and its interpretation is sure. What I've just told you, king, you can count on. It doesn't come from me, you're captive from Judah. It comes from God. It comes from God. I'm amazed that God would choose any of us to give a dream